When I pulled off the highway and saw the narrow dirt road snaking down toward the lake, a strange feeling crept up in my gutter mix of anticipation and a sliver of unease. I'd been away for 10 days on a business trip in Arizona, helping finalize a contract for a tech firm that needed rural infrastructure, and I hadn't planned on coming back until the following week. But something told me to cut the trip short. Maybe it was the call from my neighbor Joe, his voice low and cryptic when he said, "Might want to check on your place, buddy. Something's off." I didn't press for details. Joe wasn't the type to exaggerate. So I hit the road before dawn, drove straight through, and arrived at my Lakeside ranch cabin just as the sun was dipping behind the pines. And that's when I saw her Karen. HOA President Karen Wexler, wearing that familiar pastel windbreaker and the same smug expression she always wore when handing out citations for grass too high or fence paint too chipped. But she wasn't just loitering or inspecting. No, she was on the front porch of my cabin, smartphone in hand, pointing around the property as she spoke to someone behind a DSLR camera. A for sale sign was staked right next to my mailbox. I hit the brakes, my truck skidding slightly on gravel, and her head snapped in my direction like a deer caught in headlights. The guy with the camera flinched, muttered something, and started to pack up. But I was already out of the truck, striding toward them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, keeping my voice even, but firm. Karen's eyes darted like she was calculating a dozen lies at once. "This property is being listed for resale due to abandonment," she declared, arms crossing, like she was the sheriff and judge all in one. "You were gone for more than 7 days without informing the HOA. I blinked, trying not to laugh. "It's my private property. I don't need your permission to leave town." She huffed, then gestured to the man. "This is Marcus. He's with Sunview Realty. We've already drawn interest from 2 buyers." The gall of it. They were standing on my porch, trying to sell my home, and acting like they had the legal right to do it. I stepped forward and unlocked the cabin door with my key. The smart lock beeped and turned green. I looked at Karen and said, "Still think it's abandoned?" She opened her mouth to argue, but then she did something I never expected. She pulled out her phone and called 911. "Yes, there's a man here trespassing on HOA-controlled property," she said, locking eyes with me. "He's aggressive and threatening, and I fear for my safety." I could hear the dispatcher asking questions, and I raised my hands in disbelief. "You just told me I abandoned it. Now I'm trespassing?" She turned away, pacing dramatically as she repeated the lie. I calmly pulled out my own phone and dialed my lawyer James, then started recording. The cops arrived within 15 minutes, lights flashing, tires crunching.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Arrived within 15 minutes, lights flashing, tires crunching over gravel. They pulled up just in time to hear Karen trying to convince the realtor to keep the listing active. "I can forge the paperwork," she whispered, not realizing how well sound carried in the open air. When she noticed the officers, she broke into crocodile tears and pointed at me. "That man's been harassing me," she sobbed. The officer nearest to me asked for ID, which I calmly handed over. James was already on speaker. Officer, he said coolly. "I represent Mr. Mercer. He owns this land, has the deed, the survey, and the title under his name. I suggest you verify that before entertaining any more of this woman's fiction." The cops separated us to talk individually, but within 20 minutes it was clear who the liar was. Karen's story had more holes than Swiss cheese, and once I showed them the deeds stored on my phone and my live cabin security footage that recorded everything from the past 10 days, including her coming and going, they backed off fast. "Sorry for the trouble, sir," one officer said. "This looks like a civil matter at best." Karen stood by her fake tears until the officer finally said, "Ma'am, if you don't leave the premises, you'll be charged with trespassing yourself." The look on her face, pure rage and disbelief, was worth the entire ordeal. Marcus tried to slink away, but I called him out too. "You knew this wasn't her property. You're complicit." He muttered an apology and drove off. But I knew this wasn't over. Not with Karen. She'd been trying to get her hands on my lake cabin ever since the HOA tried to redraw the property lines 2 years ago and failed. She saw my place as prime real estate quiet lakefront, newly renovated interior, high-value land with no mortgage, and she wanted it under HOA control. I wasn't the only one she'd bullied. My neighbour Joe had fought her off when she claimed his garage extension violated aesthetic harmony, and Mrs. Ellison down the road received daily fines for hanging clothes outside to dry. Karen wanted the neighbourhood to look like her catalogue version of perfection, and my ranch cabin was the last holdout. What she hadn't anticipated was that I didn't back down and that I had legal backing to prove it. That night, I changed all my locks, uploaded every clip of her trespassing to a secure drive, and sent copies to James. But I also printed out a few frames of her standing in front of the for sale sign and mailed them anonymously to the HOA board with the caption, "Caught in the act." The real war was about to begin. Over the next few days, Karen tried everything short of setting the cabin on fire. First came the flurry of HOA violation letters citing fabricated infractions like unauthorized fence height, unregistered dock extension, and even excessive bird activity near my feeder. I laughed until I realized she wasn't bluffing. The HOA board, half of whom were Karen's golf buddies, voted to fine me nearly $3,500 in less than 48 hours. My lawyer James, calm as ever, filed a cease and desist letter against the HOA, citing the fraudulent listing attempt and unlawful harassment. He also requested a formal audit of board procedures, which we both knew would uncover the mountain of corruption Karen had tried to bury for years. Meanwhile, I installed new motion cameras, an automated perimeter alert system, and a private gate across the gravel entry road. I wasn't playing games anymore. Karen, however, was just getting started. The day after the cease and desist arrived at the HOA office, she came back, but this time in a golf cart, bold as brass, holding a clipboard and a printed page that looked suspiciously like a fake eviction notice. I watched her from the porch, sipping coffee, while Rufus growled beside me. She approached the gate and shouted, "You have 72 hours to vacate under emergency HOA code enforcement." I didn't respond. I just hit the speaker on my porch wall and let it play her 911 call from the other day word for word, lie for lie.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
The other day word for word, lie for lie. Her face turned red. She shouted some gibberish about resisting authority and drove off like a maniac. The following morning, I received a call from Channel 6 News. Turns out someone had leaked footage from my security system showing Karen staging the real estate photos, walking through my yard, pointing to imaginary property lines, and even peeking through my windows. That someone was probably Joe. The news ran a 3-minute segment titled HOA Gone Rogue, featuring a voice-blurred interview with me and commentary from a legal expert who outright said, if true, this could be criminal trespassing and attempted fraud. Karen responded the only way she knew how, be doubling down. That weekend, she showed up with 2 code enforcement officers who clearly didn't know the full story. "You're in violation of Municipal Easement Code 14C, one of them said, pointing to my gravel path. "This road intersects public right-of-way, and you're obstructing it with a private gate." I smiled. "Funny, because this road is on private land. Would you like to see the survey?" I invited them inside, offered coffee, and let James take over via Zoom. 10 minutes later, they were apologizing. Karen, fuming outside, pretended to be on a call while the officers got in their car and left. It was one defeat after another. But she didn't stop. One night, I caught her trying to staple up flyers on trees near my dock. I confronted her mid-staple flyers advertising an open Lakeside tour that Saturday, falsely claiming my home was part of an HOA-sponsored showing. She shrieked when she saw me, dropped her stapler, and ran like a raccoon caught in a flashlight beam. I collected the flyers, filed another complaint with the sheriff's office, and sent digital copies to a growing number of neighbors who were now watching the drama unfold like a weekly TV show. And just when I thought Karen had exhausted every card in her twisted playbook, she upped the ante. A process server showed up at my door with a thick envelope. Karen had filed a restraining order against me. The claim? That I was harassing her, stalking her, and threatening her safety. It was absurd, and James treated it as such. "Let her go to court," he said. "This will bury her." I agreed, and we didn't just defend it, we countersued for harassment, defamation, and attempted property fraud. Word of the suit spread like wildfire. HOA members started asking questions. People on the board resigned quietly. One brave board member named Denise came forward and admitted Karen had bullied most votes, lied about property lines, and altered records. With her sworn affidavit, James built a case so strong, it didn't just dismantle the restraining order, it triggered a judicial review of the HOA's authority over non-voluntary members. The court ruled in my favor, nullified all fines, and placed the HOA under temporary state oversight pending investigation. Karen? She vanished from the neighborhood for a few days. Rumor had it she went to her sister's beach house to regroup. When she returned, the first thing she did was post a rambling Facebook video about ungrateful neighbors, weaponized lawfare, and uncooperative men with too much land. It went viral for all the wrong reasons. That video was the last nail. By the end of the month, a majority of HOA members voted to hold a special election. Karen was removed from her post, and an interim board took over with one Mission Rebuild Community Trust. They dropped every citation ever issued by her, refunded fraudulent fines, and issued a public apology signed, stamped, and hand-delivered to my mailbox. Chapter 1 of this nightmare was over. Karen was no longer HOA president. The false sales listing was officially reported as attempted fraud. And I stood on my cabin porch one evening, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching the lake shimmer under a full moon. The nightmare might be behind me, but I had a feeling this wasn't the last I'd hear of Karen. People like her didn't just go away. They regrouped. They plotted. And as peaceful as that night felt, I knew the next storm was already brewing. It had only been a few weeks since Karen was stripped of her HOA title, yet the ripples of her schemes still echoed through the neighborhood. I thought I'd finally gotten a breather enough to fix the front railing she broke during her real estate tour, patch up some fencing, and take Rufus out on the lake without glancing over my shoulder every 5 seconds. But calm doesn't last long when someone like Karen's involved. She might have been ousted from the board, but she hadn't given up her obsession with my cabin. No, her tactics had simply changed. Less official, more desperate. The first sign came when I noticed a strange sedan parked just beyond the tree line near the county road. For 3 days, it showed up like clockwork, same spot, same time. It didn't belong to any neighbor, and every time I stepped toward it, it sped off. I figured Karen had hired someone. A private eye, maybe. Or worse, some friend of a friend trying to gather intel for her next baseless accusation. When I finally caught the license plate on my drone cam and James ran it, turns out it was registered to Karen's new boyfriend, a real estate lawyer named Richard, who had just relocated from 2 towns over. That's when it all clicked. Karen wasn't trying to reclaim power, she was trying to escalate the situation legally from another angle. Sure enough, a week later, I received a formal letter claiming disputed property lines between the HOA's preserved trail easement and my driveway. It was nonsense, especially since the trail easement in question was on the opposite side of the property and hadn't been used in over a decade. But it was wrapped in legal fluff, filed under Richard's firm, and backed by an independent survey Karen commissioned. James barely blinked. "They're going fishing," he said. "They want to bait you into overreacting so they can claim you're volatile." I didn't take the bait. Instead, I responded through official channels, provided county-verified surveys, and invited an actual county engineer to walk the property and confirm the boundary. The report came back clean again in my favor. But Karen wasn't done. A week later, I got a noise complaint citation in the mail. Then a second one for unauthorized short-term rental use. I don't even rent my place out. That's when it hit me. Karen had created a fake listing on some obscure vacation rental site, complete with stolen photos of my cabin and a fake host account. She was trying to create the illusion that I was running an illegal Airbnb to get the county to act. I forwarded the listing to James, who had it pulled within hours. We traced the email used to set it up, and surprise it, linked back to Richard's IP address. That was enough for James to prepare another lawsuit, this one alleging digital fraud, misrepresentation, and property harassment. Meanwhile, I kept documenting everything. But the real breaking point came when I received notice from the county that my dock permit was under review due to environmental concerns. I'd built that dock 5 years ago well within code, approved and sealed. Yet suddenly, I was flagged.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
And sealed. Yet suddenly, I was flagged. Turns out Karen had submitted a complaint through a proxy under a group she invented called Friends of Natural Watershed Access. The name was fake, the group didn't exist, and the complaint was filled with dramatic claims that my dock was causing erosion and disturbing migratory birds. I couldn't believe it, but I knew how to fight back. This time, I did something Karen didn't expect. I went public. I contacted the same reporter who ran the HOA Gone Rogue segment. I shared all the emails, documents, the drone footage, the fake rental listings, everything. They aired a follow-up piece titled, "The HOA President Who Wouldn't Quit." Karen's name trended locally within hours, and suddenly her new boyfriend Richard wasn't answering calls. His firm issued a public statement distancing itself from the ordeal, and by morning, he'd resigned. Karen was silent. But I knew silence wasn't surrender, it was planning. I added new cameras, hired a private investigator of my own, and filed an injunction banning Karen from entering within 300 feet of my property. James made sure it stuck. But I was done just reacting. I wanted to take the offense. I wanted the HOA out of my life entirely. And that's when the idea hit me. Dissolution. If I could prove corruption, mismanagement, and abuse, and rally enough member support, I could petition to dissolve the HOA altogether. James agreed, and we got to work quietly building a case, collecting signatures, and preparing to take down the system that enabled Karen in the first place. What she didn't know was that her past mistakes had created the very legal cracks I would use to tear the whole HOA down from the Fanny Sea. Inside, Karen had no idea that her every move had been helping build the very case that would destroy everything she'd tried to control. By the time I submitted a petition to dissolve the HOA, I had over 70% of the homeowners' signatures, most of whom had quietly grown tired of Karen's reign, but never felt empowered enough to speak up. Until now. My binder included everything. Falsified complaints, illegal listings, trespassing incidents, harassment, and more. James filed the paperwork with the county and arranged a formal hearing where every resident could speak. Karen showed up with a new haircut, dark sunglasses, and a pitiful attempt at a smile, pretending the whole event was beneath her. But when the evidence was read aloud, when the county attorney detailed her abuse of HOA funds, misuse of power, and fraudulent digital activity, her smile melted off her face like wax in the sun. Neighbors she thought were loyal spoke out, some of them crying, others furious. One elderly man revealed Karen had fined him $2,000 for leaving a fishing rod by the lakeshore. Another woman testified that Karen tried to evict her for having solar panels. The final blow came when the clerk read a letter from the state's HOA Oversight Division stating that, due to confirmed corruption and abuse, the HOA's charter was being revoked effective immediately. Karen dropped her head. She didn't speak. The county official closed his book and said simply, The HOA is no longer in effect. You are all free to manage your homes without further interference. A cheer erupted in the room like a thunderstorm. I shook hands with neighbors I barely knew, hugged James like a brother, and stepped outside into the fresh mountain air, knowing we'd all won. Karen didn't even stay to argue. She slipped out the back before the final gavel. A week later, her house went up for sale. 2 months later, she was gone. The Lakeside Road is quiet now. The cabin is mine, again peaceful, undisturbed. I turned the old HOA bulletin board into a community message wall where kids pin up drawings and neighbors post barbecue invites. Rufus naps beside me while I drink coffee on the porch. No more citations. No more fake listings. No more threats. Just the wind, the lake, and a story every neighbor here now tells with a grin. I didn't just return from my trip. Earlier I came back in time to stop a storm and turn it into sunshine. And that's how HOA Karen called the cops on me and ended up erasing her own kingdom.